This is Nepal and its capital, Kathmandu. There are 3 areas here where attacks have started happening. In the neighborhoods of Gopaleshwar, Banjang, and Sangku, people began leaving their homes very quickly. The reason was what they found in the forest near each of these areas. For example, here in the Sangku region, right next to it is this green mountain, and local people who live close to it often go into the forest. When summer comes and the weather gets warm, they start finding a lot of eggs in the woods, which turn out to be king cobra nests. These are huge venomous snakes and some of the most dangerous on the planet. For some reason, the snakes started coming down from deep in the mountains, moving as close to people as possible, laying eggs, and even slithering into their homes, exactly as happened in these 3 areas. Every year, Nepal records around 20,000 snake bites and up to 1,000 deaths, and most often, king cobras are to blame. So people end up living side by side with cobras for years and still have no idea what to do. In Brazil, there are jungles right here, not far from the Amazon River, and every day, huge wasps reduce frog populations by attacking their eggs. And in Japan, under these mountains, in the forest, lives the giant hornet, which can handle a newborn snake. The point is, it's hard to defeat a full-grown cobra, but eggs and newborn cobras are much easier targets. And in general, these are some of the most aggressive insects in their region. They live in colonies and hunt in groups. On top of that, Nepal's climate's good for them, and the nearest populations live very close by, in the foothills of the Himalayas. They would only need to be introduced into the most heavily affected areas, and they would quickly take care of the problem. So why is the situation getting worse now if the same risks had existed for years? Snakes had always been slithering around Nepal and biting people, yet hardly anyone seemed to do much about it. When nothing in nature changes dramatically, encounters between people and snakes shouldn't suddenly start happening more often on their own. That means some new factor must be pushing these 2 worlds closer together. And it's not that the snakes have suddenly become more aggressive or their numbers have exploded. The snakes are basically the same. It's the environment around them that's changing. Nepal's population is growing. Houses and roads are being built at a rapid pace, and forests are shrinking and breaking apart into isolated patches. As a result, king cobras are losing their usual habitat and are ending up closer to people. There's something a little strange about that, though. If snakes are losing their habitat, they should be retreating deeper into the wild and running into humans less often. That's usually what animals do. They choose calmer, safer places with fewer threats. There's only one possible explanation. Something stopping them from simply backing off and moving farther away. Or, well, slithering away. It comes down to the structure of the land. It's not just about whether the forest exists, but what it looks like on a map. And in Nepal, forests have been split into separate fragments by roads, fields, and settlements. Those fragments are no longer connected, and king cobras are essentially trapped between humans. That's just great. They simply no longer have a continuous stretch of space to retreat deeper into the wild. Even so, king cobras turning up in cities feels strange. Wild snakes normally stay away from noise and dense urban development, but if they're being spotted more and more often in residential areas, then these are no longer random encounters, but a real shift in behavior. Or perhaps cities have suddenly started offering snakes the same conditions they used to find only in the wild: shelter, food, and water. In fact, cobras are being found increasingly more often right in people's yards and even inside homes, especially after heavy rains and floods, when their burrows are filled with water. The risk becomes higher at night, during field work, and in places where there's trash or gaps they can crawl into. Even attempts to drive snakes away with gasoline are almost useless because the cause runs deeper than simple accidental intrusion. So are these just a few rare incidents, or are we seeing a broader natural shift that's starting to affect entire cities? If this isn't just a coincidence, then it should show up not only in stories, but in the numbers as well. There should be data showing that these incidents are repeating and becoming more common. And in fact, in just 1 month, 10 venomous snakes were found in the Kathmandu area, and 9 of them turned out to be king cobras. And Kathmandu's not some remote village, it's the country's capital. Yet, even here, such discoveries are no longer exceptions. That sounds less like a warning sign and more like a full-blown alarm. Still, it's not yet completely clear whether encounters with snakes have truly become more frequent or whether people are simply asking for help more often and doing a better job of reporting such cases. If the threat really is growing, the clearest evidence would likely show up in medical data because that's where the consequences of snake bites are recorded. So it makes sense to look not only at personal accounts, but at the number of actual medical cases. In Nepal, around 4 to 6 snake bite cases are recorded every day, and that number is gradually rising. At the same time, in the regions where such incidents happen most often, special treatment centers are already in place to help people more quickly and reduce the risk of severe outcomes. Well, at least that's some good news. At first glance, the growing number of snake bites seems like something medicine should be able to solve. After all, the danger is well understood. So just make treatment more accessible and that should take care of things. More hospitals, more doctors, and the situation has to stabilize. But that's just a theory, and theory always looks neat on paper. What matters is not only how many medical facilities exist, but whether people can actually reach them, especially in remote areas. As a result, Nepal's been forced to urgently expand its treatment network and open new care centers in about a dozen regions where none existed before. And all because this serious problem was ignored for far too long. The risk kept growing, while the infrastructure did not. The expansion of snake habitats seems surprising because in a stable environment, snakes usually stay in the areas they know. When a species is already well adapted to its conditions, it has no real reason to move higher up or spread into new regions. Honey, maybe we should move closer to my mom. Oh, please, not this again. We're fine right here. Something has to force snakes to shift their range, and that's exactly what's happening. Snakes are increasingly moving into higher altitude areas. This is commonly linked to rising temperatures and climate change. When in doubt, blame the climate. Because of the heat, snakes leave their shelters more often, while people continue working in the fields without protection, sleeping outdoors without nets, and keeping poultry and rodents close to their homes. In those conditions, encounters become almost unavoidable. The king cobra gets most of the blame, even though many different venomous snakes live in this region, and you'd think the danger would be spread more or less evenly among them, rather than centered on just one species. Terrifying hissing! Let me handle that. Biting people! I can do that. Looking menacing! I've got it covered. So this snake must have certain traits that make it noticeably more dangerous than the others, and more likely to cause severe consequences. And it really does. For one thing, the king cobra is the largest venomous snake in the world. Its venom is a potent neurotoxin, and it's extremely fast and agile. On top of that, a king cobra can raise a large part of its body off the ground, putting itself right at a person's eye level while still being able to strike. It can literally kill you while looking you straight in the eye. Little by little, isolated incidents begin to add up into a stable pattern. Entire regions are already affected, and as the problem intensifies, the consequences are bound to change too. This is no longer just a local threat, but something expanding far beyond that scale. As a result, Nepal could see a serious increase in conflicts between humans and king cobras. And this is no longer just a problem for rural areas, it's gradually creeping into cities as well. There are more people there, they live much closer together, and every encounter becomes far more dangerous. In short, we need to do something. The simplest and most obvious idea is to remove the source of the threat, in other words, the snakes. That seems like it would eliminate the risk and make the whole system safer. But nature, unfortunately, is much more complicated than that, and every species has its role to play. Remove one link and it immediately affects the others, until the entire chain begins to break apart. Yes, snakes serve a purpose too. For example, they help keep rodent populations under control. Once snakes start disappearing, rats and mice quickly realize the danger is gone and start breeding at an alarming rate. Honey, did you hear? Hear what? The snakes are gone. Send the kids to grandma's. We're making more. And that creates a whole new set of problems. Crops get destroyed and the risk of disease spreading goes up. In the end, there are no real benefits, just one downside after another. A gentler approach sounds more reasonable. If we can't simply wipe out the snakes, then perhaps we can control them through natural mechanisms instead. In that case, all we would need to do is rely on their natural enemies, strengthen their influence, and let the system gradually rebalance itself. That approach works for many species where predators keep population growth in check, but there's one huge catch here. An adult king cobra has almost no natural enemies. Because of its size, powerful venom, and behavior, it sits at the very top of the food chain. There's virtually nothing to threaten it. If anything, it's the one others have to fear. Since controlling adult snakes is almost impossible, the key is to target them at their most vulnerable stage. A fully grown snake is hard to deal with. But in early life, when it's still young, its defenses are weaker and its chances of survival are lower. In ecology, this is a common way to keep a population in check without throwing the whole system out of balance. The king cobra is no exception. Hatchlings and egg clutches are the most vulnerable. At that stage, they still lack the size, strength, and fully developed venom of adults. That's the perfect moment to strike. So who could actually pose a threat to young snakes? Quite a few animals, actually. Juveniles are vulnerable even to predators that would never go after an adult snake. Danger can come from some very unexpected places. Even insects such as wasps and hornets could, at least in theory, attack small vertebrates. There have been recorded cases of certain wasp species attacking nestling birds in their nests. So yes, they are capable of taking prey roughly the size of newborn snakes. At first glance, the idea sounds promising. If wasps can handle small vertebrates, maybe they could prey on young snakes as well. That would make them a natural population control already built into the ecosystem, requiring no human intervention at all. Very convenient. We wouldn't have to do a thing. But the real question is whether this idea actually matches how wasps behave in nature. Most wasps do not hunt vertebrates. Their hunting behavior is geared toward insects, which they paralyze, carry off, and use as food for their larvae. Okay, and how exactly am I supposed to carry that? They don't normally go after snakes. Such attacks are rare and mostly happen by accident. Just because wasps don't actively hunt snakes doesn't mean the two never cross paths. Even if wasps don't see vertebrates as prey, there are situations where they behave very differently. For example, when they're defending their territory, in those moments their aggression has nothing to do with feeding. That means snakes can still be attacked under certain circumstances. When protecting a nest, wasps and hornets may swarm an intruder and sting it over and over again, and they really don't care who that intruder is. A beetle, a frog, a snake, or a human.
That's it. I'm gonna beat him up.
But Steve,
I don't care if he's huge. I'm gonna beat him up. Steve, that's a tractor.
for small or already weakened snakes, that kind of attack can do serious harm. But the key question is how effective that kind of interaction can actually be. A young snake may not yet have the speed or defenses of an adult king cobra, but it's still a vertebrate. So the issue's not a single sting, but the combined effect of multiple attacks. And wasps and hornets don't act alone. They attack as a colony, and their aggression is reinforced by pheromones that attract more members. It's basically like one of them yelling, "We're under attack!" and the whole swarm comes rushing in. So a single encounter can quickly turn into a full series of attacks, and for newborn or very tiny snakes, that can be a death sentence. But do wasps actually have a real chance of affecting the population as a whole? To answer that, you have to look at the snake's entire life cycle, not just its active stages. Adults are almost untouchable, and juveniles are vulnerable, but they vanish and spread out quickly, so that leaves one more stage where intervention could really matter. So where's the defense at its weakest? And where do losses directly affect population size? At the egg stage, of course. Eggs can't move, are often barely protected, and are all clustered in one place. That means any attack on a clutch can immediately reduce the number of future snakes before they even hatch. But can wasps actually attack clutches? If this kind of attack already happens in nature, then it's not just a fluke, and a similar mechanism could potentially work with other targets too. The only question is whether this is just a chance, a rare exception, or perfectly normal behavior you could witness on an ordinary Thursday. Turns out social wasps really can launch mass attacks on the eggs of other animals. For example, they destroy the egg clutches of tree frogs, damaging the eggs and reducing the survival of the offspring. Which means that if wasps can access soft, poorly protected snake eggs, they could theoretically damage them or feed on what's inside. So if wasps can affect the egg clutches of other animals, could they also influence snake numbers in the same way? Given that the biological basis for this interaction exists, there are almost no direct observations of wasps attacking snake clutches specifically, so for now this remains mostly theoretical. But from a biological point of view, the scenario is entirely plausible, and that's already encouraging. And if wasps really can affect snake populations, could we just boost their numbers where the problem is most severe? On paper, it sounds simple. More wasps, fewer snakes, lower risk. But in real life, ecosystems almost never work in such a straight line. Honestly, I'd say it almost never does. The consequences could be wildly unpredictable, and not just for snakes. Interfering with an ecosystem often creates ecological disasters of its own. Before you know it, we're not just dealing with snakes anymore, now we got swarms of aggressive wasps and hornets too. Still, I'll admit it, the idea of using wasps and hornets is tempting. If they already have some effect on the situation, maybe that effect could be amplified and directed. But wasp behavior is unstable and very hard to control. They respond to their own triggers tied to defense and environmental conditions, and they act unpredictably. In other words, they'll attack whoever they feel like, and nobody's telling them what to do. In the end, the search for a solution runs into one simple obstacle: You can't just remove snakes from nature without causing serious consequences. A smarter approach is not to fight them head-on, but to reduce the chances of people encountering them in the first place. That's why experts recommend changing the area around homes, clearing away debris, sealing gaps, removing potential hiding spots, and improving barriers so snakes are less comfortable there and have fewer ways in. It's also important to control rodents because they're exactly what draws cobras closer to houses. In many places, homes are built in ways that make it easy for snakes to get inside. So sealing every opening is a smart precaution. At that point, the emphasis naturally shifts toward human behavior because a large share of the risk depends not just on the environment, but on everyday habits too. If many snake bites are shaped by how people behave, then changing that behavior could make a real difference. Even basic awareness training can have a noticeable effect. For example, most bites happen on the legs below the knee, often in the dark or while people are working close to the ground. So using flashlights, wearing closed shoes, and being more careful at night can significantly reduce the chances of being bitten. But even if someone knows the safety precautions, the risk never completely disappears. There's still one extremely important moment to think about, which is what happens after the bite. If people respond the wrong way at that stage, they can die, even if the original danger wasn't all that high. So yeah, it's not just about avoiding snakes, it's also about knowing how to react if you do run into one. And that's where the biggest problem comes in. In Nepal, many people don't seek medical help right away. Instead, they turn to folk remedies, making cuts in the wound, putting dung on it, or going to shamans.
You killed this guy. Me? What about the genius that stuffed dung into his wound?
As a result, precious time is lost, the victim's condition gets worse, and they arrive at the hospital far too late. All right then, but what about using technology? If snakes are showing up near people more and more often, their movements could be tracked and the places where encounters happen could be mapped. That way, people wouldn't be acting blindly, they could rely on real data. And this is already being put into practice. The World Health Organization has launched an interactive platform that collects information about snakes and snake bites. People can submit photos and coordinates, and specialists analyze the data, identify high-risk areas, and plan protective measures more effectively. What about professional snake catchers? Because a practical solution that reduces risk without destroying the ecosystem would definitely help. After all, there are specialists who know how to handle snakes safely by simply removing them and relocating them elsewhere. That means less danger for people and the natural balance stays intact. And in fact, both India and Nepal have professional snake catchers. They respond to calls, come into residential areas, carefully capture the animals, and relocate them to suitable natural habitats. Everybody wins. Phew, almost at the store. I can't believe they moved it all the way out here.
Come on, let's get you back to the forest.
Oh, you've got to be kidding me. Moving the animals may sound like a fairly gentle solution, and a safe one too, since the animal stays in the wild, but what really matters is how the snakes behave after being moved, because their outcome depends not just on distance, but on their instincts as well. Relocated snakes often try to return to their original territory, or they fail to survive in the new environment. They have a strong sense of orientation and attachment to their home range, so relocation does not always solve the problem. Sometimes it's just a delayed venomous bite. So does that mean habitat control is the answer? After all, it's the environment that determines how often humans and snakes end up crossing paths. If the space between wilderness and settlements is changed, the chances of these encounters can be reduced without directly interfering with snake populations. And this is exactly the kind of strategy already being used. Buffer zones are created between forests and residential areas. In Nepal, such zones are used, for example, around Chitwan National Park to reduce interactions between people and wild animals. These areas act as traditional strips that hold animals back and make it harder for them to wander into villages and homes. So yes, individual measures can help, but they don't solve the problem completely. When the risk keeps rising over time, what's needed is something that works in the long run. Clearly, that means a long-term plan that addresses the issue from several angles at once. And that's why raising awareness is one of the strongest tools available. When people understand how to behave in high-risk areas, how to avoid encounters with snakes, and what to do in the event of a bite, the number of tragic outcomes drops significantly. Awareness builds habits that protect people every single day. The more you know, the less dead you are. Isolated measures can produce results, but only to a point. They don't change the overall situation. If the response focuses on just one thing, whether it's treating bites or simply removing snakes from houses, the problem will keep coming back. just like snakes. What works best is a combination of measures. Habitat management lowers the chance of encounters, medical care reduces the consequences, and raising awareness helps people avoid dangerous situations in the first place. But what if nothing is done? Well, obviously, this is not the kind of problem that fixes itself, no matter how much people might hope otherwise. Nepal risks facing not just a rise in snake bites, but a prolonged and ongoing conflict between humans and the king cobra. That kind of situation could persist for years and cost thousands of lives. You owe me a like. See you later.